one of the key things, I guess, for me was recognizing like the best thing I can do as a follower of Jesus and for my family and for those I serve is to be completely me. And the more I can get in touch with who God has created to me to be and let go of the mask or the false sense of I have to be a certain way. If I can just be truly myself, the more I can live into that with authenticity and courage and vulnerability, the better it actually is for me and for everyone. That's the irony. Like, I think sometimes as leaders, we feel like you have to be a certain way for myself and for others. And then we end up masking ourselves, which further pulls us away from who God wants us to be. But the more we can just be ourselves, flaws and all, it's actually better for everyone.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am your host. This podcast features stories of Canadian church planters and leaders who are influencing kingdom movement and impacting their communities. Whether you're a church planter, pastor in a church, part of a church planting team, or someone just wanting to learn more, we pray you get inspired to become a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. We pray this is a blessing to you, and if it is, we would ask you to share links to episodes, subscribe on whatever platform you are using. With that, let's get to our next conversation. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am the host of this podcast. Thanks for coming back, returning, or if this is you for the very first time, a special welcome to you. Whether you are at the gym doing a workout, on a commute, or just enjoying your day and listening to this podcast, I'm so grateful that you have joined us. Please go ahead, subscribe, share, follow on whatever platform you're using so that you get updated when a new episode is released. The purpose of this podcast is to inspire, equip, and encourage you to become a sower of the gospel in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. And so in each of those environments, my prayer is that you would become a sower, a presence of Jesus living through you in each of those contexts and in each of those places that you become a sower and a share of the good news of Jesus. Well, today you're going to hear a conversation that I had with Matt Vincent. And Matt Vincent is the lead pastor of Lewisville Baptist Church in Moncton, New Brunswick. He's an incredible guy. I think you're going to be blessed by the conversation that he and I have with one another, especially as he talks about the longevity of this church that he pastors now, that is almost, believe this, 200 years old. It's technically 197, but nearly 200. And so we had a fantastic conversation. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with Matt Vincent of Lewisville Baptist Church in Moncton, New Brunswick. Well, Matt Vincent, an official welcome to the Sowers Podcast. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I'm ashamed to say it, but you were the very first guest that I've had from New Brunswick. I've had the Atlantic region, but I've never had New Brunswick. So an official welcome from somebody that's serving in the context of New Brunswick.
Thanks, man. I'm glad to be here and glad we finally found a day and time to sort this out and get rolling. So appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I love to ask guests when they first jump on, what is your story of the gospel being sown in your life? Many of us have stories where we can reflect upon the gospel being sown to us as we then become sowers ourselves. And so when was the gospel sown to you? How did you come to know Jesus?
Yeah, so for me, it started out at home. So grew up in a family where Jesus was front and center. My dad was actually a pastor too, which will play in probably part of our other conversations on my journey into ministry myself. But yeah, like our family modeled that from my earliest memories. We had this ritual after dinner where my dad would like read some scripture and we talk about our day and we try to understand and he'd walk us through things and we would always pray. It just felt like every family must be doing this because it just felt so normal and always a part of our rhythm. So that was my kind of introductory moments, was just in the family setting, really safe. I wouldn't say it like I didn't really understand what it felt like, a lot of a ritual, especially as I started entering teenage years and we were still doing it. It always felt like this, oh man, are we seriously doing that again? But now looking back, I can recognize the consistency and faithfulness and just the way my parents were modeling scripture and weaving it into the everyday and conversations and praying together on a regular basis. I really appreciate it now looking back. I certainly did not understand what was going on and the beauty of what they were kind of gifting us with. So that's how it all started. I had some kind of ups and downs and movements in myself and some key people and key youth leaders and things like that, who kind of spoke into my life and encouraged me. I made a decision for the Lord early on, and I would say that cemented for me in my university years. So it's not that I would say it was, it wasn't real when it happened, but the real ownership of my own faith journey and choosing Jesus, while I made a profession earlier on in life as a younger child, I think in my university years in particular is where it like grabbed a hold of me, and I felt like, no, this isn't my parents' thing. This is actually my thing. I'm choosing this. I'm deciding for myself. I'm not forced into it. I don't have to just attend because my dad's the pastor. I don't have to live this way. I was living away from home at the University of Toronto, lots of time to make up my own decisions and search for myself. And that's where I would say Jesus really grabbed a hold of my life in those kind of zones. And then since then, it's just been an ongoing kind of journey, which we can get into. But yeah, family, rooted in family, local church community, Sunday school teachers, youth leaders, all those wonderful women and men who now when I look back, I can realize what they were doing and how they're contributing to my spiritual journey. But it just felt like a normal, at that point, I probably assumed every kid was going through that. I didn't have a perspective outside of my own reality. So that's how it got started for me.
You just said that you kind of started taking things a little more seriously in university. Did that coincide in any way with what people might call as like a calling to ministry or ministry assignment? Were those stories intertwined at all?
Yeah, I guess somewhat. I think the journey I was on with Jesus in my university years, it's where, I became serious about it. I wanted to be intentional with it. There were some friends I had met through working at some summer camps that became really core, good friendships. We formed small groups during university years together. When I first met my wife, when I was in my third year of university, she's now my wife. When I first met her then in my third year, we started like volunteering and serving the church and felt like our faith and our life was coming alive in Jesus as we served and exercised our gifting. And so I guess that was like the groundwork for then my decision and call to ministry. I finished university and then I went to work in the marketplace. I was working in a foreign exchange company downtown Toronto. We got married. Our first daughter was born fairly quickly into our married life. So life got real pretty quickly on us. And as we were, again, serving and volunteering in our local church, I think my posture changed. I became more open to wanting to do whatever God was inviting me to do. I previously had a pretty strong conviction and a wall against anything to do with formal church leadership. I think just because of some of the things I witnessed my parents experience in my dad's journey, I felt like I want to serve the church, in the church. I love Jesus, but I don't want to cross that threshold of becoming like what I consider part of like the institutional church model, whether it be like a higher level of leadership or certainly a paid pastoral staff person. I was like, that's not for me. So I kind of resisted it, but the more I kind of moved forward, I recognized that sometimes when Jesus was inviting me to things, it felt like I was coming into this place of, well, am I going to be faithful to the invitation, or am I going to say no and then kind of move into a place of disobedience? And so that's how our first kind of call to a formal church role happened, was that we were wrestling with this opportunity. It presented itself somewhat out of nowhere to us. It required a move out of Toronto into Hamilton to work at a church plant there. And it really felt like Jesus was inviting us, and it felt like an issue of faithfulness. Like, we need to say yes to this. And also the company I was working for, the cool thing, I think God knew I needed this, was he said, well, if that thing doesn't work out for you, just come back and I'll give you a job back at the company again. So it was almost like it felt safe to experiment with stepping out of a marketplace role into a ministry role. And we were, young enough, and our daughter was only 6 months old, that we're like, well, we'll give notice on our apartment and move. There's an adventure to it. We weren't locked into a certain place. So we kind of stepped out, and that was in 2002, and have been in like different levels of formal church leadership ever since.
Yeah, so talk to us.
Yes, it was a call to ministry, a different one than maybe some people experience. Each step and each change in vocational ministry felt like the next version of faithfulness, of saying yes to the opportunity Jesus presented. And as we waited out and prayed and asked others voices that we trust, mentors to pray about it with us, it really felt like, nope, that's the right thing to move forward in. And that's kind of helped shape how we make the decisions. So definitely a call to leadership, but I would root that more in the issue of like faithfulness and discipleship, less like a big Emmaus Road moment where it's like, I've always known I wanted to be a pastor. That has not been my experience.
Yeah. So talk about kind of that first role. You felt like there was kind of the safety net in the background that I could go back to the other company. So talk to us about that first ministry role and then some of the steps along the way. Cause, from what I know of your story, you just kept going from different place to different place and working in the church, not so dissimilar for me from the background of your father.
Yeah. Yeah. The first role was a youth pastor and worship leader kind of joint role, which was an easy step in. I was volunteering at our local church, working with youth. I loved kind of that opportunity. And so I was with that church. It was a newer church plant. I was with them for about 3 years. And somewhere fairly quickly along there, I realized it's not that I wasn't doing a good job, but I probably wasn't, my gifts weren't necessarily aligned in the youth kind of traditional youth pastor role. And so kept going there. And then an associate role happened, just, a short distance away that didn't even require us to move home. And so then I moved into an associate role, which felt like a better kind of growing and exercising my own personal gifts. And then from there, another opportunity came with a larger church to help plant a site with them, and served with that larger church for many years. And then a denominational role happened, and a church overseeing church planting denominational role happened, until where I am now, back in a local church context. So there's been different steps along the way. Part of it was me just understanding my own gifting and what worked best and how God had equipped me. And also just the right opportunities at different times. It hasn't always been like smooth sailing, but always being open. I would say to anyone who asks me, I think it's always worthwhile to have a conversation as you're exploring. It never hurts to have a conversation. And then as you have that, to engage a small circle of trusted people to help you discern together, so you're not doing it in a vacuum. And that's been kind of my pattern up until this day, when I moved from the Greater Toronto Hamilton area to Moncton, New Brunswick, about 1.5 years ago. So each of those steps have felt like natural, opening up, but involving community and helping the discernment and the decision making. To now I'm serving at a historic Baptist church, Lewisville Baptist Church in Moncton, New Brunswick. It's 197 years old, which not many churches in Canada can say they're that old. And so there's new experiences here and learnings, but it's been just like a wonderful journey, where I've been able to recognize this is where Jesus wants me to exercise my gifting. But I'm also open-handedly always saying, Jesus, if you want me to serve in another way, I want to always respond faithfully. I don't want to assume anything or root my identity in the role, which is really hard for pastors to do. I get that. But always in the back of my mind saying, the role is not my identity. It's not who I am. And so as a follower of Jesus myself, remaining open-handed with the role I have, the opportunities I have, and just to see what he does and how his Spirit leads, being willing to respond to that.
Have you always, right now I'm feeling a degree of confidence in the reality related to your identity. Is that something that you feel like you've always had, a sort of a disconnect between your identity and your ministry calling? Or was that something that you think you've learned along the way in the different assignments that God's given you?
Yeah, it definitely learned along the way, and not fully formed or realized.
Yeah.
It can be hard. But I think in the beginning, particularly because I grew up in a pastor's house, my first number of assignments, I think I had a real hard time, like almost an embarrassment, to be honest with you, Matt, feeling like if I was to meet a neighbor or a friend or people on the street and ask what I did, I almost had this like embarrassment in me to say I'm a pastor in a church. And I don't know, we could probably unpack that for a long time on where that comes from. That's a whole other thing to keep working on with spiritual direction. But some of those things, I think I couldn't quite find myself in it. And it wasn't until I did a master's program, where we were working through a number of things, and with a spiritual director and a coach, that I helped kind of separate and parse out some of those pieces to be confident not only in my calling and my role right now, but also to know and work through some of those ideas that it doesn't wholly define me, and being okay with that. one of the key things, I guess, for me was recognizing like the best thing I can do as a follower of Jesus and for my family and for those I serve is to be completely me. And the more I can get in touch with who God has created me to be, and let go of the masks or the false sense of I have to be a certain way. If I can just be truly myself, the more I can live into that with authenticity and courage and vulnerability, the better it actually is for me and for everyone. That's the irony. Like I think sometimes as leaders, we feel like we have to be a certain way for myself and for others. And then we end up masking ourselves, which further pulls us away from who God wants us to be. But the more we can just be ourselves, flaws and all, it's actually better for everyone. It just feels counterintuitive to own that, and to let go of the things that you're not good at. And I can admit, I know there's lots that I'm not gifted at, but live into the few things that I think God has gifted me in, and let those be okay, and not let it fully define you. So as I wrestled and learned those things, just the better thing for me is to be fully who God's created me to be, and it's better for everyone. As we all find our pieces in that, then that's how the church and the community flourishes, as we all come alive in those things. So that's been a learned journey for sure. Still on the way.
How have you found returning to pastoring from being in a network denominational role? Did you come back? Like I sometimes think about, the NFL coach that, gets out of coaching, goes into a broadcasting role for a little bit, and then they come back and they've kind of got new perspective. They've got new fire. What's it been like both from the side of, progressing and being a stronger, having confidence in who God's made you to be. But then also probably for some time watching churches and pastors from the outside and now coming back inside. What's that meant and what's that look like for you?
Yeah, the years I was in denominational leadership, I loved that. I loved going in and coaching and helping pastors and new plants emerge across the country and beyond Canada, actually. And I loved everything about that. But one of the things that I always struggled with is this feeling like I don't really belong anywhere, because I'm just somewhere different almost every week. And what I didn't realize until I got here and started back into the regular rhythm of being rooted in one community is how much I missed it. I wasn't necessarily, I think, I wouldn't have been able to say that maybe before until I got here, but now I'm like, oh, I've really missed being rooted in one community where I'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you Wednesday, or if I don't clear everything up, I'll see you next Sunday. We'll keep this conversation going, and the rhythm of life that provides. I have really missed that, and I've enjoyed being back to it. Enjoyed not just being a guest speaker at different churches or that kind of travel, but being like, oh no, I'm here and I'm in the office, and this church in particular is a lot different than any other place I've been. It's as a historic church in the same neighborhood on the same corner of the city for that many years. Like there's a neighborhood sense. People drop in all the time, both for groceries and supplies and help, but also to chat with a pastor because they have a problem, even if they're not a part of our church, or church people just dropping in to see what's going on or have lunch. Or like I've never pastored in a setting before where it felt like very much in flow and in rhythm. So in some ways it's been awesome. In other ways it's been hard because I'm like, there's just always people around, or often people around. And so as an introvert myself, sometimes I'm like, man, there's always folks. But there's also beauty in that rhythm in relationship with people that comes from being more of a neighborhood church, which none of my other experiences were, both in the church planting world and some of the bigger church settings. It wasn't like specifically a neighborhood church where people just dropped in and were always bumping into each other. So there's been lots of good learnings and some challenges trying to get myself sorted out what it means to always be aware that you could bump into someone all the time. And Moncton's not a huge city. So I feel like it's, the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that I feel like it's 2 degrees. Like you're in Moncton, you're 2 degrees from meeting someone who knows you. Like you're just always right there. So there's just a different awareness that I've had to learn in terms of conversations and connections, but an opportunity that comes with that is like really wonderful as well.
Before we transition to talking more about the work in New Brunswick and what you're seeing there, I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit over the years on how your aspirations in ministry, or even how your perspective on ministry success and ministry failure has evolved over time.
Yeah, that's good. That's a tough question for an Enneagram 3 achiever. I don't know if you follow any of that stuff, but yeah. as a 3 and an achiever, again, this tips into what I said a few moments ago around identity and belonging. So, the unhealthy version of myself is I derive my sense of identity and purpose by what I accomplish and the things we're able to do. And so I think initially when in my younger ministry years, it was all about the next thing, the growth, this next thing, this, all the kind of metrics that are important to pay attention to for any church leader, but aren't the most important thing, right? So I used to have friends who would tease me like, Matt, you always have itchy feet. Like you're always looking for the next thing. You're always ready. And to some degree that was true. I had a hard time being settled in my own local space because I always had the misunderstanding, I would say, and assuming that there was always something bigger and better and faster out there. And I've kind of come to the end of that. It doesn't mean that I don't want to do the best I can and steward my gifting and opportunity. It doesn't mean that sometimes I don't wonder and dream and wonder what God is doing. But I look at it a lot differently now. I want to have a different sense of timing and pace, which is really important here in the Maritimes for sure, which we'll get to. I used to always just want to do more, more, more. I think my wife and I have learned through the years, and I've had to take ownership that I made choices that indirectly I thought I was doing the right thing, but indirectly, hurt my family and some of my relationships because I just wanted to do more and more and more and more without thinking and missing kind of the fact that by saying yes to all these things, you're in effect saying no to the people closest to you. So I've had to, take ownership for that and also realize I don't want to be defined by that anymore. So I'm trying to mature in my leadership. I certainly want to do all God has, and I want to give my best to it. But my perspective is not bound in what can I do in the next, 6 months or 12 months. It's more like, hey, I got a season now. I'm not that young, but I'm not that old. So I have a season in front of me and I just want to do the best I can and push in the right ways, but also be willing to say no and kind of have more focus. I've had some really good friends who've modeled this for me around consistency and faithfulness and presence and not feeling like you have to just jump around. And I think moved around quite a bit because of that itchiness and that desire. And they've just shown me what it means to be like called to a local place and then not that you can't change or move, but wait for Jesus to release you from one thing and invite you into the next. And I can't necessarily say I made wrong choices, but I can't confidently say I was always waiting on Jesus in that. I think I was a little bit of the holy hustle I was trying to manufacture. And I'm just not that way anymore. So I just kind of have a bit more peace to that, a different sense of pace and rhythm and perspective. I'm able now to zoom out a little bit. That's one thing about church planting, if you've ever done it. Like your history as a church planter is so short that the highs can feel really high, but the lows can feel really low because everything is just like, this is my timeline. But when you stretch that out over years and decades, now the highs aren't quite so high and the lows aren't. And so you're able to have perspective, which I think can only in some ways come through time and experience. You can talk about it all you want. Like someone could have told me that 15 years ago and I would have been like, oh yeah, sounds nice. Okay, what's next? I wasn't ready for it, but I'm just kind of in a different place now, I'd say, if that makes sense.
Friends, we'll get back to my interview with Matt Vincent in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I want to invite you that if you represent an organization that you would like to be featured in the middle of this podcast, you might be saying, what do you mean by the middle of this podcast? Well, traditionally, in the middle of every episode, I feature a little bit of an ad or a little bit of promotion for the organization that guest on that episode on that day represents or is part of. Every now and then, however, there isn't an obvious organization to support. And so enter whatever organization that you are part of that you feel would be a good fit in this podcast. If you want to begin a conversation about what that might look like, you can email ask@thesowerspod.ca and we can begin communicating about what that communication would be and how we can partner together in the sowing of the gospel in the places where people live, work, learn, and play. And so if you believe that your organization participates in that and would be a great partnership, please email me once again, ask@thesowerspod.ca. And now back to my interview with Matt Vincent. Yeah. No, I was going to ask, like, if you were to, it's kind of funny you said, I don't know if I'd listened to that 15 years ago, but go back 15 years. Like, what is something about the next 15 years you would have never seen coming?
I honestly wouldn't think I was still pastoring 15 years ago. Like I'm looking back now, like 2002 took that role, and now, 22 years later, still here and still kind of, I would have never assumed I would never thought I'd still be in the local church. I never thought I would leave Ontario to go to an old historic Baptist church in Atlantic Canada. Like that's, who knew? But that's been part of I guess the adventure and the journey is like small steps, and being willing to say yes, small steps over time can lead you in lots of different places. And I'm so thankful that Jesus never asked me to take a huge giant leap. I don't think I would have been mature enough or ready enough to take a giant leap, but small steps, you look back over 22 years and you're like, well, look at all those things, but they're all smaller little increments. I'm not sure I would have thought that 15 years ago. And I wasn't ready for the conversations around pace and place as well, what it means to belong to a certain location and feel like I'm pastoring a location. That's again a bit unique here, is I feel like I'm pastoring people who call this church home, but also this neighborhood and this part of the city in a way that I've never experienced before because of the history of the church and the rootedness in community and the pace of the population. It's just a different sense of rhythm, and it's been a great learning for me and challenge and stretch for me as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's go there. New Brunswick. I'll be honest, I know very little about New Brunswick. You were in Ontario for the longest time. Maybe you can relate to that. New Brunswick. What is New Brunswick? Yet it's a huge landmass and it's a huge part of our Atlantic provinces. So take us to New Brunswick. What does it look like to serve in the Atlantic region? What are the idols of the Atlantic region, in particular New Brunswick? But just help our listeners and help me understand a little bit more about New Brunswick, especially coming from Ontario to going there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the East Coast of Canada, I visited on family vacations and some travel, but yeah, never thought about living here. The population, I think, I may get this wrong, but the population of the whole province is similar to the population of like the greater Hamilton area where I was living coming here. So you think about that, it's just so different. You have key cities in the province, and then in between them, you have highways and vast forests. It's like a province of forests and small communities and towns. But there is, as opposed to Ontario, where it feels like there's so many new to Canada, new Canadians, so many people from all over the country moving all over the province. It feels very transient and kind of, things change really quickly. There's a different sense here. People often go away for studies or for work, but often come back. And so there is like loads of history, not just in our church. I mean, like provincial history where people for generations and generations and generations can trace themselves back. And that was a brand new kind of experience for me, the idea of belonging and being in a place, and certain family names just run all the way through, and traditions, and it's a different culture. It's a wonderful, I love living here. Our family has really, really loved living here. It was a bit of a culture shock in some ways at first. Moncton's a really great city, but it's a small city, and things are just different here. So there's been some learning in that. I'm losing track of your question, so steer me back on. But
yeah. Well, what would be some of the idols of Atlantic Canada? Like you've talked about kind of the rootedness of people, the desire to return. I should say that the only thing that typically comes up with New Brunswick for me is when people are like, I'm going to sell my house for a bunch of money in Ontario and move to New Brunswick and get a bunch of land. But yeah, yes. Tell us a little bit more, like, the average person that lives in New Brunswick, do they remind you of like, I don't know, the average Canadian? Like, who is the average person in New Brunswick, and what matters to them, and how are you finding, therefore, there's the opportunity to sow the gospel?
Yeah, I think what not different maybe from other places, but really certainly a strong sense of like community and family. Like family means a lot here. So there's a general, I would say interesting learning has been, there's a general friendliness to almost everyone from New Brunswick that we've ever bumped into. People are willing to chat. People stop and have conversations like on the street. Like if you stop and say, hey, how's your day going? Most people will just stop and chat with you. Like it's so different from like growing up in the Toronto area, right? Like people pause and take time. And sometimes I'm so impatient. I'm like, why are we like in the grocery store? I'm like, what is happening that you just think it's time to have a conversation? But there's a different pace and a friendliness to that. But it's also then hard to in some ways to break in when you're not from here, right? You don't have, so there's friendliness and welcome, but everyone kind of has established friendships and rituals and practices and holidays and the people they hang out with. And so from being from away, like you kind of feel like, oh, like I've lots of good friendships, but it's hard to know how to go sometimes in a deep way with folks. Another thing I've really recognized is that mentioning I'm a pastor working at the church isn't necessarily a roadblock at all. I have not found any pushback or weirdness with people. They may not want to talk too much about it, but it doesn't shut things down right away. And certainly if I say I'm from Lewisville, and this is a funny thing about here, there's a Fabricville, which is similar in Ontario to Fabric Land, but it's called Fabricville across the street. Some of the people in the city won't know where Lewisville is, but if you say it's the old white church across from Fabricville, everybody I've ever met in the city knows it.
Wow.
So yeah, so in terms of like knowing where we are in the city, I've never met anyone who says, oh, I don't know where that is. That's a whole different thing too, in terms of recognition and knowing where we are. So strong sense of family, strong sense of belonging to Atlantic Canada. Like they don't want to, they celebrate that they're from here, you know, and not against like we're not from there, not in a negative way, but just like an embracing the place. Like people work really hard and then also love to relax really hard too. Like it's really awesome. Like there seems to be better sense of boundaries from my experience than, you know, working and living in the GTA where blurred lines everywhere around work, family, life balance. That's not so much here. Even in the church world here, there's a sense of pace. Like, you know, I can't turn off who I am in terms of trying to get things going and make some changes and enjoy things and get rolling. But people's comments are often like, hey, we got lots of time. Like, it's all good. You know, I've never had board members necessarily say that. Like, hey, we don't need to do all that right now. That's great. Like, we can hold on to that. That's kind of been some new learnings because their perspective, again, is like, we have generations and generations and generations, and until the Lord comes again, we've got lots of time. So we want to be faithful and work hard, but we're not going to kill ourselves in it. We're gonna enjoy our time and enjoy being with the family, enjoy being with friends, enjoying nature. Like people love being outside and being on the ocean and being on the lakes, and so the sense of like living in nature is just like, it's awesome here. It's kind of been one of our favorite things about, like, we can drive to the beach within 20 minutes and we can be out in lakes or out in the forest, and it's pretty awesome. You made a crack about the housing thing. I should mention though, there is a little bit of animosity about all the people from Ontario who have moved here, because they would say we're wrecking the housing prices in New Brunswick, which is actually kind of true. You know, you sell in Ontario and you come here, all of a sudden it's a whole different market. But they view it as like, what are you doing? You're driving all of our prices up. And there have been a lot of people from across Canada and a lot of people from Ontario we've met who have moved here. Kind of from the pandemic era onward, there's been a lot of folks coming this way.
What would be the primary industries? Like, who are you running into, meeting in your church, and what are most of them doing for vocation?
In our church, like lots of people in healthcare and nursing, loads of teachers, lots of people who, there is a I think it's the third biggest company in Canada. It's called the Irving Corporation. Again, I knew nothing about it, but they do oil, forestry, so paper products, gas. They do a whole host of things. And so Irving, the Irving family here has been an interesting, I read a book this summer about the Irving family. So I think they're one of the largest employers in the province. And so if you work for them, it's great. If you don't, you're like this family who owns everything. They're kind of behind the scenes. But there's some folks here who work as part of different levels of the numerous companies that the Irving Corporation owns. But just kind of like a general, smattering of all kinds of things, from really professional roles to people who just work really hard, drive trucks, work in industry, things like that. It would have a lot of similar things. A real good mix here. Like there are universities here and colleges in the city, but also like lots of kind of more labor jobs. It's a good mix. And one of the recent changes I would say is there's a lot of new Canadians who are coming into the city, which is really changing things. A lot of people from Southeast Asia, a lot of different African countries coming in particular, like a lot of Nigerians are coming here and they're finding their way in through, education or work abroad kind of things. We've met and become friends with a number of Ukrainian families who left the Ukraine when the war started, had been living in Poland for a while supporting the war effort, and have recently now moved to Canada. And so we've become friends with a couple key families that's been a part of their journey. So now they're living here in Canada and in Moncton, and never, I mean, 3 years ago, never thought they'd come here, or however long the war's been, a couple of years, I guess. So yeah, it's like for people who have been in Moncton for their whole life, they would say the city's changing really, really quickly. Coming from the GTA, it doesn't feel like that. It feels more like, oh yeah, like the world, different parts of the world are showing up here. But for some people from here, it feels like things are changing really rapidly for them. So it's a big mix. Some really love it. I think some are getting used to what that looks like to become a multicultural city, so that's a big change.
Based on that, what do you think is the unique opportunity for Lewisville and, the proclamation of the gospel? There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. Like how do you speak into this cultural moment?
Yeah, it's awesome. Like our church has changed so much, even in the year and a half I've been here, with new people to the city, whether they're moving from different parts of Canada or moving to Canada for the first time. And so one of the benefits I've inherited is because it's a historic church that's well known in the city, we have people showing up on the regular who've just heard about us or talked about us, and they just show up because they're looking for church. So I kind of feel like we benefit from all the history and the faithfulness of this church through generations. That's wonderful. A lot of new Canadians coming who are adding different like flavor and ideas and richness. I think, as the body of Christ, we're better when we have each other all together. We certainly have our own flavor of doing things, but I think that will continue to change as more and more people show up and they bring their thoughts and ideas and gifts to the table. We often talk as leaders here that we believe that some of our key influential leaders who will help us in seasons ahead probably haven't even walked through the doors yet. And so the idea of keeping seats and leadership seats open for new people and new gifting to show up, not that they immediately step into that, but always being cognizant of the idea that this isn't ours to hang on to. It's actually ours to steward right now and to be willing to say, God, who's next? And who do we need to continue to invite into different, all kinds of levels of leading, of serving, of volunteering. And that creates an excitement because you just sense like God is doing something. It feels like a real opportunity to reinvent, not because it needed and it was stale, but certainly to reimagine what this church could look like. This is a little rabbit trail, but recently we were talking and going through like the culture of the church. We were trying to give it new language this last year, drawing on all the historical themes, but trying to give it new language for the season ahead. And I stumbled upon a newspaper article that was when the church turned 100, which again, for a lot of churches in Canada, they're not even 100, but it was an article from 97 years ago. It was in our archive here. I found it. And the beautiful thing is, as I read it, and I read it as one of our services, is that the people 100 years ago who called Lewisville home, it mentioned the things they were praying for. And it was for like God to do a new thing, to open them up, to be a blessing in their city, to serve and love their neighbors well, that God would give them a future. So they were praying with hope 100 years ago. Like pretty much in different language, but the exact same things we were praying this year at 197 years, like God give us opportunities to love our neighbors, to serve our city, to introduce more people to Jesus. And that was like, when I found that, it gave me goosebumps because I'm like, those faithful sisters and brothers were praying that 97 years ago at their centennial anniversary. And we're praying that now for the next season. And that's just cool to be a part of like a lineage like that. That's been so wonderful for me, like the perspective. And I think I talk about it a lot here because it's so new. And I often have people at the church say, man, you talk about our history more than we ever did before. And I keep saying, because it's so unique. It's like something to be celebrated, we need to remind each other this is special. And as new people join, to help them understand the story of what God has done in this church through, all these years. So that's been awesome. I feel like there's huge opportunity in that because of the way the city's changing. People are open and willing to have conversations. And so that's been really cool, really exciting.
You obviously have spent some time studying the history of this church. God builds his church. We trust that. Would you say though, as you studied the history, are there any kind of common disciplines that the church had for its longevity? Like what would you say are the themes of the people through the years? Like, I mean, again, as you're kind of struck by it, I'm struck by it just sitting here as well. 200 years, like what are some of the disciplines of the church over that time?
Yeah. And you know what's cool about this? Because what I'm about to say is like, it's not earth shattering
Yeah.
anyway. Like if we read the story of the early church found in the book of Acts, we may do it slightly differently, but it's all the exact same things. They considered all their things open to the community. They shared their possessions with each other. They gave generously. They shared meals. They devoted themselves to teaching and prayer. They served and loved their city. Like it's all the exact same things. So there's a long history here. As a Baptist church, they often joke a lot about like they love to eat, like they love to, but I think everybody loves to eat, but they have a long history of like meals, community meals, serving the neighborhood meals, providing food for people. That's a really kind of that gift of hospitality and open table is a really big thing. And so we've been calling that out and trying to make it more part of our rhythm to have these family feasts together where on Sunday nights you can invite any neighbor, like it won't be awkward or weird. They can just come, enjoy a meal, and be introduced to this idea of a larger community. And that is like a very like beautiful Christian thing, right? The shared meal together, the open table, welcoming the stranger and those who need a meal and those who look for relationships. So that's big. Again, rooted in community, the sense of like ownership of our neighborhood. How do we serve and work with local schools, local organizations? How do we volunteer outside of our walls? Again, nothing. The church's been doing this through its whole history, but in this context, they just kind of it looks different in every context, right? um, and real commitment to like to prayer and to study scripture and to allow the Holy Spirit to transform and change us. And so, for instance, the whole last year, we basically only outside of Christmas and Easter, we hung out in the book of Acts the whole year. And we are maybe a third of the way through, but we just allowed that story to spark our imagination and then to talk about what does this mean now as the ongoing, we can draw our roots back from that early church from the commissioning of Jesus. So like, who are we now as we learn from them? And that's been really, I mean, some people may say like, man, are we still in the book of Acts? But I've been loving it because there's so many things that apply for us. And we just have to, culturally like figure out what it looks like in our setting, in our context. But that's the work of the church to figure out what does this mean to embody the message and mission of Jesus and to live it out in our city. And so that I think has given us a new sense of life and a new sense of a new season ahead of us and a lot of energy and excitement to kind of not assume 197 years our best years are behind us, but like, what if we're going to be around for 500 years? Then there's a lot more for us to get going on so that 100 years from now, they could find an article and say, hey, those women and men were still praying about the things that we're praying about. And they were still sacrificing and giving and serving and loving their city. So that's kind of the zone we're in right now.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Matt, just in closing, as you reflect on your own ministry journey over the last number of years and now being in New Brunswick at Lewisville Baptist Church, what would be your parting words to pastors, those starting out or those in the journey right now that are struggling to keep going?
Ooh, that's good. Well, I guess a couple things. So one of the things I learned through spiritual direction that's become more of a regular practice for me, ongoing. It is a spiritual discipline. It takes discipline for me, but I would encourage all leaders to create time and space just to simply sit with Jesus, not come with an agenda. Yeah, sure, there's things that you want to seek his leading and wisdom and input on, but learn what it means just to sit in silence and stillness with Jesus. Have a centering phrase. Like my centering phrase is Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. And it takes a lot of effort for me to not just start my day by like hitting the ground and just go, go, go. But when I stop and I start my day with just trying to be centered with Jesus and allow him to inform my thoughts and to heal my hurts and to give me direction, energy, it's just changed who I am as a leader. So I would just even say that to people who are discouraged or not sure how to lead right now. Like just sit with Jesus in the way, knowing that true identity, wholeness, fullness, everything is found in that. And again, it's so simple, but it's so easy, at least in my experience, it's been so easy to blow by that because of the priority of the urgent, everything that needs our attention and focus, and pastoring it, like it just never ends, It's one of the reasons I love doing the dishes at my house, because it's like they start dirty and at the end they're clean and I've finished a task, because it never feels like in pastoring anything is ever done. So the idea of just sitting still and being present with Jesus and just having a perspective where, and this community has really helped me. There's always going to be stuff that we can get to tomorrow. It's okay. And that's really hard for me to let go of, but I'm learning that the idea of just zooming out and and doing what we can today, but not feeling like it's all on my shoulders. It's an ongoing learning, but certainly in the last year and a half since I've been pastoring here has been something that's really made an impression on me, on being good stewards and working hard, but also knowing like it's not our church. Jesus is building this church. It's okay. Like we're going to figure it out, and it's okay to have seasons where things are busy, and it's okay to have seasons where we take a break. I used to be defined by, it's just a busy season. But that was my answer to everything, and we just can't certainly not lead with longevity that way. We're just gonna burn out, or we're gonna be disillusioned and hurt. And so for me, it just starts with sitting with Jesus and being quiet and just not trying to be the answer for everything, and just sitting with the Lord. That's my starting point. And that's what I encourage people just to do. Just practice that discipline of sitting with Jesus and let everything you do flow out of that centered place.
Well, friends, I'm sure you would agree that there is so much from my conversation with Matt that could be applied as this episode's action step. The thing that I want to focus on, however, is when Matt was talking about being yourself, being the person that God made you to be, acknowledging and being aware of the gifts that He has given you, and living into those gifts and being the person that He's made you to be. I know how hard it is as I was pastoring to be influenced by other pastors and believe that I needed to change myself in order to be more like them, in order for people to approve or love or accept me. And over the years, I came to discover that what I was invited by God to do was to be the person that He's made me to be, to determine what the gifts are that He has given me, and then to use those gifts for His glory, for my good, and for the good of the church around me. And so Matt talks about in the morning, listening into the Spirit of God, being reminded of the love that Jesus has for him. And out of the love and out of that overflow, he was then more equipped to serve others. And the result was that actually the people around him were served far better when he was being himself rather than when he was trying to be someone else. And so that's the encouragement for you as you listen to this episode today, as you reflect upon it, is to lean in, trust Jesus' love for you, know that you are accepted in Christ, and live out of the overflow of what He is doing in your life and how He has blessed you with the gifts that you've been given to serve Him and to serve the church. Hey, next week, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Rather than releasing a new episode, I'll be releasing an episode providing highlights from the episodes over the last month. This should give us an opportunity to lean in a little bit more into the conversations I had. I'll be giving some commentary as I've reflected back on those conversations, which will hopefully be a blessing to you. Or if this is your first time, this will be a way for you to hear a little bit of a summary, a recap of the last month. Thanks, everyone.